We're live.
I think we are live. There we go. Yeah. It took a second to load on my end, so sorry about that. Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. I'm your host, Michael Lofton, joined by Eastern Orthodox Craig Trulia and Oriental Orthodox Subdeacon Daniel Kakish. How are you gentlemen doing?
Good.
How you doing, Michael?
Very good. It's good to have you back on. I know you've been on a couple times, but it's always an honor to have you on. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you. The honor is mine.
So,
thank you very much.
And, before we dive in, because what we're talking about essentially today is the Council of Chalcedon and theology behind it, and perhaps some of the differences between Eastern Orthodoxy and Oriental Orthodoxy, and perhaps even Roman Catholicism. Maybe just for anybody who's watching or listening who isn't familiar with Eastern Orthodoxy, if you could just kind of explain the differences between Chalcedonian theology and Miaphysite theology. And maybe if you can explain the difference between Miaphysite teachings versus what is falsely called Monophysite teachings. So maybe explain why perhaps that isn't the best term.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michael. So the first time actually I was on the show, we discussed it a little bit. I'm happy that we're going to get into it more today. Before I start, I want to say to everybody who's watching, blessed fast of Nineveh to all of you who are fasting it, Chaldean Catholics, Syriac Catholics, Assyrian Church of the East, Syriac Orthodox, of course, and all the Oriental Orthodox. For those of you who don't know, it started sunset of yes, because the day starts in the evening for us. But for those of you who started at midnight, same thing. Now, regarding Chalcedonian Christology and the differences. So first, I want to talk about the second part of your question, Michael, how we are not Monophysite, because all of the Monophysite heretics, we ourselves anathematize them. They're on our list of anathemas, Eutyches, Julian, even pre-Monophysite heretics like Apollinaris, all of these guys, they are anathema. And so if we're anathematizing them and we're anathematizing their Christology, then obviously we don't agree with them. And this is not a new anathema. We have anathematized them from the 5th century. The difference with Chalcedonians, I think this is on an individual basis. Because we have a Christological agreement with Rome, officially, between Coptic popes and the Roman popes, between Syriac patriarchs and the Roman popes. So with Rome, there are Christological agreements, and Rome is Chalcedonian. With the Eastern Orthodox, there are, with some of the churches, like with the Antiochian Church and the Syriac Church, there is an agreement from 1991, I believe. Not only does it include intercommunion, but it even includes, I think it was the 4th section of that, where it's saying not to proselytize against proselytizing each other. Now, when I say on an individual basis, because there are some Eastern Orthodox individuals who believe humanity in Christ is self-subsistent. And in this case, we would not agree at all. This is Nestorianism to us, and we would say that's heresy. Now, Oriental Orthodoxy doesn't allow for this type of Christology. And Eastern Orthodox, and I think Chalcedonian Christology does allow for it. It leaves the option open for that type of thing. Even if you would agree with me, Craig and Michael, even if you would agree with me that it is heresy to believe that the humanity is self-subsistent, but it doesn't mean that everyone who believes that in your churches would be excommunicated for believing that. And I know of Chalcedonians who believe that and are in communion with their their Eastern Orthodox Roman Catholic parishes, and it's fine that they believe it. And not only do they believe it, but they promote it. Whereas in Oriental Orthodoxy, they would be excommunicated. So that's a little bit
Sorry,
of
I'm
the
having a little bit of delay on my end. Could you maybe, so you're essentially saying that Chalcedon does not explicitly deny the concept that Christ's humanity could exist on its own. There's nothing in Chalcedon that would deny that, but your communion has denied that after Chalcedon. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
When did y'all deny
I'm not
it? Was there
saying
a particular council that?
so. Ephesus 431, the 12 anathemas. Saint Dioscoros, when he presided over Ephesus 449, he brought with him only the Creed of Nicaea and the 12 anathemas of Ephesus 431. So there was no definition of faith at 449. It was just who believes this, who doesn't believe this, who has believed what we've always had, and who doesn't. So they brought those who were from the Antiochian school, such as Theodoret, Ibas, and who we all agree were heretical. Now we agree, and they were condemned by those standards, by the 12 anathemas. And we know that they don't agree with the 12 anathemas because Theodoret explicitly, he wrote a refutation of each one of the 12. And then Cyril replied back to him, telling him how he was wrong. And then Chalcedon exonerated Theodoret. And his writings were then again condemned 100 years later at the Chalcedonian Council of Constantinople 553. So the condemnation is of, does our Christology align with the 12 anathemas of Cyril or not? And and Chalcedonians always like to bring up the formula of reunion in 433. Cyril's letters after the formula of reunion should be with the context too. So John of Antioch wrote the formula of reunion. Cyril just agreed for the sake of peace of the church with the encouragement of the Pope of Rome. But still, his Christology after didn't change. He didn't compromise or whatever. He stuck with his view, and he even continued to regard the same people as heretics that he's always regarded as heretics.
Yeah, okay. And I want to touch on that a little bit more, but I also want to ask you another question before I pass this on to Craig to ask a few questions and give his input as well. And then we'll come back to some of these things. Let me ask one more thing though. From the letter, second letter to Nestorius from Cyril, just so that you could clarify and explain to anybody who might be confused and have misunderstandings about the Oriental Orthodox position. Cyril says this, and tell me if it's something that you could agree with. He says, but because of the two natures being brought together in a true union, there is both one Christ and one Son, for the difference of the natures is not taken away by the union, but rather the divinity and the humanity make perfect for us the one Lord Christ by their ineffable and inexpressible union. So he's still saying that, the natures still retain their differences. They're not taken away after the union. And some would probably try to mischaracterize your position and say that, oh, well, you believe that these differences no longer exist after the union. Would you take issue with that, or would you agree with St. Cyril here?
Of course, we would agree with St. Cyril. So we believe that he is consubstantial with the Father and consubstantial with us. That's the point of the incarnation. So when it comes to the formula itself and the Greek words, the Greek in Alexandria, Egyptian culture, is its own culture, even if they spoke the same language as, say, Anatolia or Thrace or wherever people are speaking Greek at this time. Still, they're Greek, they're using the same words, but maybe they're using them in ways unique to that region. Whereas in Syria or Mesopotamia, we're using Syriac anyway. Now, the word physis, we see from Cyril, I think you guys would agree with this, the word physis and hypostasis to Cyril seems like he's using them interchangeably, hypostasis and physis. Whereas in Syria, we don't, or in Syriac, we don't even have a word for ousia in the first place. In Syriac, there's no word for that. So we just use the Greek word ousia. And the word for physis in Syriac translates to kiana, which means actually being. It doesn't mean nature. So you can't say he's two beings in Syriac. As soon as you say that, you become an historian. If you say he's
Right.
two, and then the word for hypostasis in Syriac is gnoma. Gnoma, we say the Trinity is three gnome. So if you say he's two gnome, you made of the Trinity four. You can't say he's two gnome either. So he's one gnoma, one kiana. You can say he's two ousia, sure, he is, because he is. It's true. So in the Egyptian way of talking, if speaking Greek, and in the Syrian Mesopotamian way of speaking Aramaic, it is heretical to not say what we're saying. If we are saying he is, because the Syriac Chalcedonians were saying he's two kiane, they're trying to translate physis into that word. And then it turned out to sound like they're saying two beings. They're saying, no, he's not. This is blasphemous. Last thing I want to say before you pass it on to Craig, I heard one of the shows, the previous shows, Craig was saying that because we started going to the Eastern Orthodox schools, so then we started to become Orthodox. And before that, we weren't Orthodox. Come on, Craig, you know better. You know better than that. We can see what Oriental Orthodox believe by reading their fathers. Like even, let's say, none of us here are Oriental Orthodox. How do we know what Oriental Orthodoxy is? Not by reading our own polemics of Chalcedonian history, but to see what did those guys say? What did Severus say? What did Philoxenos say? Jacob of Sarug say? Not like with the Nestorians, we can read what Theodore Mopsuestia said, what Nestorius, the Bazaar, I believe that's really is. We can read what they say. So this is to know what Oriental Orthodoxy teaches, not by your own church's polemical view.
You know, you're touching on something here, and I want to give a chance for Craig to respond to that. But you're briefly just mentioning there about how there's this language barrier, and that's actually something that I've seen many people talk about. I was reading an article earlier by Emmanuel Gergis, I guess is how you say his last name. He was saying that Cyril uses the terms physis, hypostasis, prospon, all as synonyms, and that can be confusing because when we talk about hypostasis, we're referring to personhood, and you could also say prospon, but he meant it as reality. So he would say one hypostasis, one reality, whereas if currently, if you were to say one hypostasis in the way most people use the term today, they would be confused because they would think that you're saying one person. So there does seem to be a confusion of language here. So I imagine if we get beyond some of that language barrier, some of the misunderstandings would be removed. But let me give you a chance to jump in here, Craig. Any comments or questions, anything you have?
Obviously, when speaking of this issue, Subdeacon Daniel's going to be the expert for several reasons. One, he's seminary trained. Two, when you're part of a certain group which emphasizes miaphysitism, you're going to know more about it than people that don't. Just like Eastern Orthodox are going to know more about pneumatology. Roman Catholics are going to know more about the Immaculate Conception. It's because things distinct to a certain communion, that's like their home field advantage. And so I'm not going to come here tonight and pretend I could play in that home field and understand those terms, because I really don't. I would say even as an Eastern Orthodox Christian, I would not be this expert on Christology. I'm still just learning myself. However, what I will try to share for at least the edification of the audience is the little that I do know on this topic. But let me begin at least with a question, because I'm curious, because it connects to the Fifth Ecumenical Council, and it has to do with the issue of self-subsistence. And so let me just ask Subdeacon Daniel again. So you're, just to clarify, you take issue with the teaching that Christ in his human nature is self-subsistent, correct?
Yeah, his humanity is like the subject of the incarnation. There's a single subject, and he is the divine person, the Word of God. The Word of God became man, but the person is divine only.
The person is divine only. So if Christ in his human nature is self-subsistent, what does that mean to you? And as a second part of that, what are the ramifications of that if it were to be true?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
If Christ, grant for a moment that Christ in his human nature is self-subsistent, what would that mean if he's in his human nature is self-subsistent, and what would the ramifications of that be if that were to be true?
If it were to be true, then there would be two persons. There would be the human, the divine Word of God, and there would be Jesus, the Son of Mary. And there would be two modes of being in that case.
Okay, and that's where this kind of crosses into philosophy that I'm not too familiar with. So let me ask this question then. Are you, as a human being, in your human nature, self-subsistent?
Yes, because I am a human person.
But Christ in his human nature would not be self-subsistent like you.
Yes, because he is a divine person.
So he's not human in the same way we are human. It's right. This is not a category as in saying Christ has a deified nous. This is not what you're saying. You're saying in the entirety of his human nature, he wouldn't be self-subsistent because his human nature is this different category. Would that be correct?
No. He is human like us in every way, except he's not a human person. He took on a human nature to his divine person. So God was the one who was born of Mary. God in the flesh, God incarnate, was born of Mary. Not a regular human who God was united to.
Okay, so let me understand this, because I'm getting this from a secondary source. Like I said, I'm not an expert on this. I haven't read the spiritual fathers of Oriental Orthodoxy. So this is quoting who is venerated Saint Barsamas. Out of context, I'll leave the citation and leave it to whomever to find out the translation's accurate or something, because I've only interacted with the secondary material.
Sure.
But in the 81st miracle told in the life of Barsamas, he's quoted as saying, if the blood of the crucified only Son had been of the same nature as the blood of the sons of Adam, how could it have expiated the sons of Adam? So my question to you then would be, would you agree with Barsamas that the blood would have been, Christ's blood would have been different by nature than your blood, my blood, all the sons of Adam? Or is this something that Oriental Orthodox would not affirm? This would just be the private opinion of that saint?
No, Saint Barsoma, we need to understand what he's saying in his tradition. So before him, by 100 years, by even more, Theopathism was very prevalent in the Syriac tradition, even east of the Roman border, even in Persia, where it later became Nestorian. So what he's saying is the blood of Christ is divine blood, meaning and I think this also exists in Eastern Orthodoxy, because I've read it from Eastern Orthodoxy too, that he made, like, for example, when we take the Eucharist, we take the divinity with the body and the blood. There's no separation. If it's just the body and the blood without the divinity, How does it benefit anything if it's just the body and blood of a human? But because it's the body and blood of God, that's why it benefits us. Because God died on the cross, we have salvation. Not because a man died on the cross. That's what St. Athanasius said.
And so when I presume that Oriental Orthodox concur, they believe in the divinization, right? Like as St. Athanasius teaches, does our blood in heaven and glorified bodies, is it of the same nature as the blood of Christ, that in the way St. Barsamas is saying it, or would there still be a difference?
Are you saying like partaking of the divine nature, like theosis type of thing?
Well, right, if Christ is, before I get to like, because I could tell you what the Orthodox Church authoritatively teaches on this topic, but just to make sure at least I understand your concept, which would be if the quote again, St. Barsamas again, if the blood of the crucified only Son had been of the same nature as the blood of the sons of Adam, how could it expiate the sons of Adam? You responded, well, this is because the blood of the crucified one is deified. So my question would be, upon the bodily resurrection, when we have spiritual bodies, will our blood be deified in the same way, where it would share the same nature as the blood of Christ, or would there still be a difference?
Well, okay. The blood of Christ is blood. It's blood. It has a type, just like ours does. I don't know what his was, obviously. It was human blood. It was just blood. But because of whose blood it is, that's what makes the blood different. It's not different in its nature. It's still our blood, but it's different because of the person whose blood it is. It's the blood of God. That's why. Not because in and of itself, the plasma is of a different substance or something. It's the same as ours.
And so just to confirm then, you resurrected in heaven would not have the blood of God. You would still have glorified human blood, but it wouldn't be the blood of God.
It would, yeah, because I'm not God, but he has human blood, but he's God. I'm a man and I have human blood. Therefore, because he's God, the blood saves the whole world because he's God, not because he's man.
All right. So I know, excuse my ignorance, because it does sound to me fundamentally that would make Christ's blood, Christ's flesh, not human the same way as ours is. And it seems unabashedly so, because you said, well, he's not human, he's deified human. And even when we're deified and divinized in heaven, we still don't attain to that. So there seems to be this gulf between us as humans and Christ as human.
So what I'm saying, I don't know about this question about when we're in heaven, or that this is not something that I don't think anybody's thought about. But what I'm trying to tell you is, I didn't say he's not human. I said he's not a human person. His hypostasis is not human. It's divine only. So the person of the Trinity, he's a divine person, right? He's not a human person. This person of the Trinity, eternal, he took a human nature to himself. I'm using English words in 2020. So now you could say, because we say miaphysite, meaning it's a composite, etc. But the person of the Trinity is one person. We can't say he's a human person and a divine person, because that's two. That's not one. Once it's two, my friends are just sitting here. They're gonna listen to us. Once it's two, then there's four. Yeah. Then it's four people.
Okay, so I'm going to read this because God bless the Reason Theology audience. Get into the nitty gritty. I'm going to read paragraph 7 of the 5th session of Constantinople II because it gives the Orthodox teaching. You mentioned the term composite, which is used in the Council of Constantinople II, and it's also used by Justinian quoting Cyril. So the term comes from Cyril of Alexandria.
Right.
But to quote paragraph 7 of the 5th session, it says, if anyone saying in two natures does not profess the one Jesus Christ our Lord to be acknowledged in Godhead and manhood, in order to signify by this the difference of the natures from which the ineffable union took place without merger and without either the Word being changed into the nature of the flesh or the flesh transformed into the nature of the Word, for each remains what it is by nature even after the hypostatic union, but understands this expression in respect of the mystery of Christ in terms of a division into parts, or while professing the number of natures in respect of the same one Jesus Christ our Lord, God the Word incarnate, does not understand the difference of these elements from which he was compounded to be in perception alone, a difference that is not destroyed by the union, for he is one from both and both through one, but uses number for this end, so that the natures are separate and self-subsistent. Let him be anathema. So I know that's a long statement, but to kind of put this back together, maybe help all of us digest it. It affirms that Christ's human and divine natures were compounded. It affirms that they're still separate. And it affirms that they are both self-subsistent, to use those terms. And so being that I can't expect that without you reading this, maybe I could send it to your Facebook if you want to look into more detail. I mean, what comments would you have on that? Because that's our ecumenical statement on this topic as Eastern Orthodox and presumably also Roman Catholics. So I'd be curious as to your comments on this, because obviously Constantinople II was the most conciliatory of the ecumenical councils towards the Oriental Orthodox. That was really its purpose. So, I mean, let me just leave it to you for some comments on that.
So a few things. First, Saint Dioscoros in Chalcedon, he was saying of two natures or from two natures, and this wasn't allowed at the time. Yeah, they didn't let him have that. Afterwards, at Constantinople 553, like you mentioned, Canon 8, it is allowed. And then in Constantinople 680, it's not allowed again. So I don't think that the Chalcedonian position is very clear on what it's talking about regarding the composite nature or not. Number one. Number two, about self-subsistency, I don't think so. When I'm saying self-subsistent, the human nature is not self-subsistent. What I mean is this: the body is God's body. So we don't say, for example, like the Nestorians or like Theodore and others, we don't say like God the Word performed miracles through Jesus of Nazareth. We don't say that, because Jesus of Nazareth is God the Word. He is Him. He's the same person. You can interchange the words there. You could say God ate or Jesus ate, because Jesus is God, equal. Just like when you say Mother of God or Mother of Jesus, it's the same thing. If you believe that the humanity in Christ is self-subsistent in the way that I'm saying is not allowed, would you say in the temptation, when Jesus was tempted, it was possible that Jesus of Nazareth, in his human nature, as you guys like to say, could have sinned?
You're right. Now you're posing that to me.
Mm-hmm.
Or you're asking whether Jesus' human nature could have sinned. The answer is absolutely not, because he did not have gnomic will.
You mean his will is always in agreement with the,
he had a deified nous, and so Christ did not have to decide between two options, not being able to know what's more right or what's less right. This is a somewhat complicated issue, which I don't think is appreciated. So, for example, it's not sinful in of itself not to know the best of two options, but it is the result of the fall not to know the best of two options. Before that, the fathers teach that Adam and Eve were well aware what they were doing, but they were deceived to make the wrong choice. They weren't deliberating, is it better to eat the apple, less of that? Because that gnomic willing did not exist until after the fall, according to St. Maximus. And Ryan said he's not your saint. But that's why, grappling with that issue, we could give the answer that absolutely not, Christ cannot sin in his human nature, because human nature, as it's supposed to be, not fallen, cannot sin. That's what's actually natural. The fall has perverted the human nature so that sin becomes possible.
So, thank you. We agree. Now, what if you had asked me the question and I would have said, if I would have said Christ, let's say I said, which I don't believe this, but let's say I said Christ doesn't have a human will. Obviously, the evidence that you are a monophysite or whatever. You said his will is deified. I said, when we were talking about his body, I was saying it's the body of God. Still, the same, I said the same, consubstantial with us, but the person is God. That's what the difference is between my person and his person. Our nature is the same, except I have sin, but our persons are different. He's God, I'm human. Now, you're saying his will was deified, and I know what you mean when you're saying that. You're not taking away from his humanity by saying his will was deified. You don't mean that he didn't have a human will. So I'm not going to accuse you of some sort of heresy regarding him not having a human will, because I know what you mean. You're saying he does have a human will. His human will was deified. Because it's why? Because he's God. That's why. Do you see what I'm saying? And back to what you were asking me about the body. Is the same.
It's I want to clarify two things, because even myself reading that passage, and this I'll have to put in the comment section of this video, reading from Constantinople II. I think to clarify and correct myself, I think it's rejecting that the natures are separate and self-subsistent. They're set. It says he was compounded to being perceptual in a difference that is not destroyed by the union, for he is one from both and both through one. So that's what it's affirming. But this is what it's rejecting. Uses number for this end so that the natures are separate and self-subsistent. So it would appear, at least what you're espousing is the same thing that's in that passage.
Yeah, so Oriental Orthodox, we usually point to Constantinople 553 when we are talking to Eastern Orthodox who don't agree with us, to try to tell them, look, you guys agree with us. Ephesus 449 is Constantinople 553, 100 years ahead of time. It anathematized the same people. It didn't even give a Christological formula. It just repeated what was said at Ephesus and Nicaea. And then 100 years later, here's Constantinople 553 doing the same thing, but now adding reaffirmation of Chalcedon and the Tome of Leo.
Now, probably my final question is, before I pass this back off the mic, or to you, if you want to elaborate on anything, would be the 7th century heresies, monothelitism, monoenergism. Clearly, it had the support of Miaphysite leaning, patriarchs. Clearly, these theologies, these doctrines were devised in order to bring the Oriental Orthodox back into the fold. But they seem to me extremely wrong. For example, the idea that Christ really did not have a human will. right? I mean, so what would, in your view, the teaching of your saints be on the issue of Christ's human and divine wills, human and divine energies, especially considering in the 7th century, it appears they would have rejected classifying them as separate.
So in Oriental Orthodoxy, there's 2 ways that we are allowed to talk about the wills subject. The first one is 2 wills, just like the Chalcedonians use it. That's the first and early form of this post-schism. Saint Severus actually taught it 100 years before it was even an issue for the Chalcedonians, and they had a council about it. Saint Severus explicitly says that Christ has 2 wills. And then the other way of talking about it is the Mia way of talking about it. So corresponding to the way we think of nature, Mia, physis, is the same way for most Oriental Orthodox you talk to. They will say 1 will of 2 wills. But regarding the history of that time, regarding like when people were trying to find different ways to appease us and falling into more heresy because they were doing that. So they were not just condemned from the Chalcedonian side. They were condemned from the Oriental side too, because we both viewed them as becoming more heretical by trying to find these compromises. The Monothelites, for example, were condemned by both of us. The Maronites, they were the Maronites in our part of the world, and I think there are other examples that I am not remembering, but I know for a fact that anybody who was already saying Christ is in 2 natures yet has 1 will, that doesn't make any sense. And if anyone that was saying Christ is of 2 natures yet has absolutely 1 will, he was also excommunicated. And I just want to say last thing before Michael takes it is, again, back to that body subject we were talking about earlier. I think what you were thinking about is kind of like Julianism, is what the questions you were asking me. And Severus, I think, as you guys know, was Julian's biggest enemy. So I encourage you strongly to read Saint Severus. Julian is on our list of anathemas because he was saying the body was impassible and all of this stuff regarding the body, where it actually changed the nature of the humanity. And Severus was fighting that. And Severus is our saint. Julian is a heretic to us.
Subdeacon, let me ask you some questions. You know, I'm pretty sure I know the answer here, but let me just go ahead and ask it. And I have a reason why. You'll see in a moment. You would, I assume, agree that the human nature of Christ is inhypostasized in the personhood of Christ.
That's right.
I figured we would be in agreement there. Yeah. How would you respond to people who would not agree with us and say, well, okay, well, if that's true, then that means he's not a historical person because he never had a human person. You know, this human nature never existed on its own. It was just joined to this divine word. So he's not an actual historical person. What would you say in response to that?
I'll say, then what is he? Like a fake person? A ghost, a phantom? What is he then?
Some people level that against the those who would take the view that, you know, his human nature is inhypostasized. They would say that means that, you know, he's not a human. Well, he's not a historical person, if you will, because he didn't have a human person. He just took to himself the divine person. So I was just curious because it's part of the article that I was reading earlier. I forget his name, Emmanuel. I mentioned him.
Yeah, Emmanuel.
And about those who he was talking about those who would disagree with that position, and that was one of the objections that they raised. And I've never heard that objection before. So I was just curious what you thought about it.
I want to.
It does sound pretty.
Yeah, I want to add to that. If and then I think so. We are all believers in our churches, and we all believe that our church is the one true church, and all of that. I think it's also important to study each other's saints to appreciate, because like I can read Saint Maximus and appreciate him, and I can read John of Damascus, etc. Even though John of Damascus and Maximus, like, they talked a lot, like they didn't like us, right? But I still, I could still read from, like, I could read about icons from John of Damascus and Maximus regarding the wills, etc. But if you also take the time to read people like Saint Severus, because Saint Severus didn't just argue with Chalcedonians, which you should see his arguments against Chalcedonians. Maybe you will find some differences, but you can see his arguments against Monophysites. So Saint Severus was arguing both sides. It wasn't just against the Chalcedonians, but it was against Monophysites too, like Sergius, like Julian I mentioned before. So his works are out there; they're available. Pauline Allen, she has a good book on Severus, and so does Ian Torrance. So just putting it out there for everybody.
Where would you recommend that one starts with the actual works of Severus? Is there some kind of primary source that you would recommend to begin with?
I would recommend to begin with Pauline Allen's book. That's the one, and then go to Torrance, because Torrance deals, it's more dense, and Pauline Allen, it's like you get a little bit of everything. You get his arguments with the Chalcedonians, with the Neo-Chalcedonians, with Monophysites, so you can see a little bit of all. Yeah.
Another question that I was curious about is, when it comes to Chalcedon and Constantinople too, would Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox have to repudiate this council, or would you say that there's a way that these councils can be understood in an agreeable way for Eastern Orthodoxy, assuming that the anathemas are dropped?
So from the Oriental side, and I'm not sure this is acceptable for the Chalcedonian side, I think for the Oriental side, the only request that is given and expected is mutual lifting of anathemas, and that's it. I think Chalcedon can be an ecumenical council for you, but not for us.
Right.
So I think that's the view.
I was reading Bishop Hilarion, and he was essentially saying the same thing. He was basically communicating that upon certain conditions, Eastern Orthodox, and of course by extension, I would imagine your Roman Catholics could say the same thing. It would be ecumenical for them, but the Oriental Orthodox would not have to accept the council as ecumenical as long as they accept that the theology doesn't contradict their own. In other words, Oriental Orthodox don't have to say that Chalcedon and Constantinople too are our own theology, but Oriental Orthodox have to at least say it's not in contradiction to theirs.
Yeah, I think
you would agree with that.
Yeah, and I think it was a big step that our agreement with Rome, there's a key point in there. It says both sides have always held to the Orthodox teaching. So it's not that we're agreeing now. It's that we've always actually, we're both right, but now we're realizing that we were both right this whole time. A lot of people don't agree still till now. A lot of people don't agree with that, but I think it's very interesting that our leaders have agreed on that.
But you would say the differences are essentially then linguistic, not theological in that case.
Yeah, and but I think even bigger. And I've talked to people. I can't say who, but they're on the front lines of this, and they told me that the issue now is no longer Christology for the people who matter. For the people who matter, it's not Christology. Maybe for the Facebook warriors it is, but for the actual important people who are making these decisions, it's not. the issue now is not even the, believe it or not even the anathemas. The issue now is which patriarchal lines were the right ones, and who has that because Antioch is Petrine, right? So who has that continuing line? Alexandria, for the most part, agreed that it's the Coptic side. But for the Antioch situation, I think that's where the debate is. Was Saint Severus rightfully deposed? Was he not? I actually have some questions for Eastern Orthodox. I know you guys were both like asking me a bunch of questions. Is it okay if I ask some questions to Craig? Or
yeah.
You want to? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Craig. So first question, I have a few. First question is, so I'm not so much asking for the Eastern Orthodox concept of how you accept an ecumenical council. I'm also asking, in this specific case, why did the Eastern Orthodox not accept Ephesus 449? Why was it not accepted for the Eastern Orthodox?
To go by the definition given in Nicaea II, it was not received by the Bishop of Constantinople. It was not received by the Bishop of Rome. It was not received by all lands beyond the ecumene, and so there have been several counts against it.
Okay, so from my studying of that council, it was called for by an emperor who was a saint, churches, both of us, and he also had called Ephesus 431 and Constantinople 381. It's the same emperor who called Ephesus 449. Dioscoros presided with the knowledge of everyone, in agreement that he will preside over the council. He was handpicked by St. Cyril to succeed him in the first place, and Juvenal co-presided with Dioscoros. Now, the reason why Constantinople, I don't think the right word is Constantinople didn't accept it. It was the Patriarch of Constantinople who was judged at that council. Therefore, and as we know, he was deposed, and another patriarch was put there instead of Flavian. So that patriarch who came after Flavian accepted Ephesus 449, and so did the whole East, and that's why Rome excommunicated the whole East for 2 years until Chalcedon. And then we see it again, and I want you to notice this. So the whole East accepted this. Rome did not. Later, from the late 450s, after Chalcedon, so Chalcedon makes all the patriarchs Chalcedonian. By the late 450s, they revert back to non-Chalcedonianism. Jerusalem starts it, I think, and then Antioch follows suit in 468. And then by 482, the Henoticon is there. Acacia signs it. We know what happens. So you have the whole East again, not in communion with Rome again. And then in 418, as you know, the Libellus is signed. And then it's restored between East Chalcedonians and Rome. Communion is restored. In both situations, the Eastern Orthodox have to ask themselves, I think, who decides here what is right, what is the right side, and what is the wrong side? And the presence in 2020 of the Oriental Orthodox makes this an issue. So as an Eastern Orthodox, I think it's good to ask, why do I say this side is right and this side is wrong? Not because Craig says. Can't be because Craig says. So either the Pope was right in all of these situations, in that the Pope has to sign off on a council for it to be ecumenical, or the Pope needs to agree with the council for it to be whatever the Pope needs to do. And therefore, that's why Ephesus 449 isn't valid and Chalcedon is, because the Pope said so. And the Pope also said the Henoticon was wrong, which Eastern Orthodox agree on now. And the Pope had the Libellus. So do you see this theme of either there is this authority of the Pope that kept kind of winning out, or there's the other side who is Oriental Orthodox? I don't think there is I'm not seeing, Daniel is not seeing another option here. So if you can help me to see that, if there is another option, because if there is, I'm not seeing it.
Well, let me clarify then. Are you saying yes or no that Flavian of Constantinople accepted Ephesus 449?
No.
No. Okay. Are you saying, and I actually don't know the answer to this question, but just to clarify, that Anatolius accepted the Council of Ephesus 449? I know that he was ordained a bishop from that council.
Dioscoros, yeah.
He otherwise accepted the council and received it?
Yes, for 2 years.
Okay, so just want to clarify that. But you said, again, the Bishop of Rome did not. And clearly the bishops of in Egypt that were against Dioscorus, that came out in Chalcedon, clearly appeared they were strong-armed. So that creates another issue, because this comes up in the minutes of Chalcedon as well, which is to what extent, if people are being compelled to do it, are they actually receiving the council? Right? They're not consenting at their will. We have the same issue, for example, with Pope Liberian. Now, wait, I think we're going to go with this.
Sorry, Craig.
I think we're going to go with this. I could say, I wish I had my second hat here. I could say as a historian that pretty much after Constantinople I, and we only don't know about strong arming in Nicaea and Constantinople I because we don't have their minutes. From what we could tell, there's been strong arming in every single ecumenical council there ever was. So it's a kind of dubious argument. Dubious not because it can't be true, but because it also cannot be true. Whether or not, okay, they were strong-armed in the robber councils, so to say. But yes, they were also strong-armed in the Chalcedon, but just not bad enough, where what really happened there was acceptable. Or clearly, if we go with Constantinople too, the strong arming there, I think if you read the minutes, is palpable. It seems to me they're almost actors reading a script that Justinian wrote for them. When you read the minutes, it's got a very different character than Chalcedon, where there's clearly they're going back and forth. They have disagreements.
Like they all have swords on their backs, like poking them. You know?
Yeah, that would be like a gun behind your head, right? But it's that doesn't exist. So you could clearly, as the historian, perceive those things. And so that's why I think what creates the issue is that, one, you need the consent of everyone there. And like you pointed out, well, then how about the fact that Alexandria didn't consent? Because clearly Dioscorus didn't consent. And the problem with that is he was actually canonically deposed by any standard, by the same standards they held Nestorius to when he didn't answer 3 summons, because he was waiting for the embassy from Antioch and for a while even Rome to attend the first council of Ephesus. And so a deposed bishop, obviously canonically deposed by the standards of Cyril of Alexandria, same exact standards, his consent is not necessary. And the other bishops of Alexandria did consent. And the other bishops of Alexandria did ordain the new bishop. Let me get his name because I don't have it memorized. I do apologize. This here. Proterus. And so he was ordained. And until the Roman emperor changed, they lived with Proterus until, new emperor, we think we could get away with another one. And they lynched him. Yeah. And so it's not a cut and dry situation, but it's one where if I could go with probabilities, because I wasn't alive at the time, and nor am I seeking to offer anyone epistemic certainty where I can prove without a doubt The Eastern Orthodox side is right. Their view of history is right. I cannot offer that. What I could offer is facts, which is there did appear to be honest exchanges in Chalcedon. There was strong arming, but it does appear also they were able ultimately to make their decisions and also not to consent to everything. For example, in the 16th century, Rome picked up their bags and left because they weren't going to deal with Canon 28. Just like I think it's the second session, the third session, they weren't going to accept just accepting the tome. They wanted their own definition. So it goes back and forth. But what really is more cut and dry is that Dioscorus was canonically deposed. There could be no doubting it. And that is canonically deposed, it's completely legitimate that they ordained someone else. Now, I'm not aware, nor do I think we have enough of the minutes of 449 to know, but I'm not aware that what's his name, the guy. Gotta go again and look at my list. It's late for me. I go to bed early. That Flavian, and so if Flavian wasn't canonically deposed and he didn't assent to the council, I think it makes it dicier to assert that the Council of Ephesus 449 could really legitimately be held at the same level as Chalcedon, just looking at it just mechanically. So I guess that'd be my response to that.
So before I get to my next question, I just want to comment on a few of the things you said. For the Oriental Orthodox view, we don't recognize, this might surprise you, that we don't recognize Dioscorus' deposition until he dies in 454, so 3 years after Chalcedon, and then the one who replaced him is Saint Timothy. So nobody recognized the Chalcedonian.
But to clarify, so do you reject he was summoned 3 times?
We don't.
By the council, by all the bishops of the world?
Just like St. Chrysostom was also. And he rejected the thrice summons. It's the same way we think about it.
And so you're saying the deposition, look at me, we might hold this up here. So you're saying the deposition occurred as in they tried holding it, but you don't recognize it, just like we wouldn't recognize the deposition of St. John Chrysostom.
Yes, and St. Athanasius.
Now, again, and I'm going to ask this then. Being that the canons of Constantinople I would have made it where the Bishop of Constantinople, the one that could be appealed to over and above Alexandria, and canonically, like we know from Serdicia, Rome is the one that would be canonically appealed to above Constantinople, then it doesn't seem to me that without the consent of Rome, which didn't consent to that deposition would hold, because they'd still be able to appeal. Now, so when you have an ecumenical council and you have all the parties involved, then it has to go in order of precedence, because, for example, an appeal to Rome is the highest outside of an ecumenical council. So the Synod of the Oak, for example, was an ecumenical council. It didn't have representation from everyone. And so that deposition could arguably not be recognized as authoritative because it could still be appealed to. But with Chalcedon, there's nowhere you could appeal to anymore. It's one thing where Constantinople says they hold a local council, they dispose Dioscorus, and then Dioscorus appeals to the Pope. Right. However, that not being the case, and when I say Pope, I'm saying the Pope of Rome. That being the case, being that there was a council, everyone was there, then the deposition, I could see it as there would have no other conclusion than it would have been canonical. And so just because I'm Eastern Orthodox, it doesn't mean I can't recognize that, when it comes to canon law, especially in the 5th century, everyone in communion with each other. Alexandria was in communion with Rome until the council in 449. Doesn't mean I can't recognize, well, then that would have been necessary to exhaust those possibilities to appeal. Because clearly you would affirm that there was the ability to appeal depositions, and there was canons determining that. And if not canons, precedent.
So a few things, and Michael, correct me if I'm wrong on this. Rome and Alexandria both did not recognize Canon 3 of Constantinople 381 regarding Constantinople being elevated above Alexandria. That's the first thing. The second thing is...
I will interrupt that, actually. That is something that's historically arguable, and there's several good reasons for that. For one, all the earliest collections of what canon law in the West did include that canon. Two, we have reason to believe in Augustine's third book on baptism against the Donatists that he cites canons from Constantinople I. Now, he doesn't cite that canon, but the fact that he cites the rebaptism canon of that council pertains that they received the canons from the council. We would have evidence. This would be consistent with the fact that all our collections of Western canon law include it. Third, in the 16th section of Chalcedon, a big ally of the Bishop of Rome, he was one, I forget his name, but he was one of the guys that rejected Ephesus 449. He went to Rome itself, so he was pretty much an ally of Rome, though he was an Eastern bishop. He alleges that he read that canon right in the presence of Leo, and Leo accepted it. And so I personally see too much consistency up to that point in time that this canon actually was accepted. Because again, it didn't put Constantinople above Rome. And plus, Rome recognized that Constantinople was taking part in the ordination of bishops and appeals from bishops over and against, let's say, the see at Ephesus, for example. And so if they're already recognizing these things, this all would be consistent that they received that canon up until the point that Canon 28 became an issue. I mean, that's why Father Price says they were kind of latecomers. They were latecomers to the importance at that issue. And so it's only speculation before that point, because every written document we have up to that point in time would have been that Rome accepted it.
Leo actually says that he rejects the canon. He writes to Anatolius.
He writes it after.
Anatolius even says that.
Recorded in the 16th section of Chalcedon that it was read right to him and he accepted it. We have from Augustine that he received the canons of that council. We have all the manuscripts of Western canon law that they received that canon. So it's
I think it would be good to
it's very fortunate all of a sudden that he had
on this
but
one.
we have compelling historical evidence to the contrary.
So
I would suggest reading Don John Chapman on this. He goes over the history of the canon. But I'm sorry to interject. Go
and
ahead.
I would recommend reading the introduction to Session 16 from Father Price. And like I said, taking serious the primary sources we do have on this.
The thing is with I think we can see regardless of what the texts like the now trying to figure out how they viewed it, whether they accepted it or not. I think applicably you see that they didn't, just from their actions. I think when you have 3 times at least in a row, right after Constantinople 381, 403 happens, Alexandria deposes Constantinople. 431 happens, Alexandria deposes Constantinople. 449 happens, Alexandria deposes Constantinople. It happened 3 times right after that. So Alexandria did not care. Not just they didn't care. Also, when Saint Cyril is saying the creed in Ephesus, he says the creed of 325. There's no evidence that he even cares or knows about 381. 449, same thing. They only use the 325 creed in 449. There is no recognition of it as, I think, the first time where the Oriental Orthodox recognize Constantinople 381 is in Ephesus 3:475. And Patriarch Peter the Fuller of Antioch, he puts the creed into the liturgy for the first time, then the Chalcedonians follow suit. Chalcedon obviously recognized it at Chalcedon, but the creed was said in the liturgy after that. So there's no practical applicable evidence that they were actually recognizing the canon in practice. I think maybe you're right that it could be debated in terms of literature, but I don't think on the ground it mattered. My other question for you.
Well, I would agree with you. I will just say this. So I will agree with you that I don't believe Alexandria accepted that. Outside maybe the council, they probably would have not been allowed to leave outside the actual council in Constantinople, the first one, but that's pure speculation simply because we don't have its minutes. But that aside, I mean, let's take into account that this is now from secondary sources. I've read that Dioscorus styled himself as the ecumenical patriarch. He actually used the words ecumenical patriarch. He spoke of the primacy of Alexandria. So clearly, there are some high views of their own status. I mean, just look at the Edict of Thessalonica. It pretty much equates Rome and Alexandria in precedence of, theological and ecclesiological importance. If those who don't know what the Edict of Thessalonica is, it's the first law in Rome that made it illegal not to be a Christian, and it cites Rome and Alexandria being Petrine sees and very long, so you could Google it and read up on it. So no, I would agree with you that I don't believe seriously by their actions affirmed it. I would think that I was speaking again specifically of Rome, and I think Rome took issue specifically because the rationale that Canon 28 offered. The rationale Canon 28 offered was unacceptable at the time, but I think it's ironic that later it really wasn't, because later Western Roman Catholic councils would affirm Canon 28. So it's a bit of a moot point anyhow.
Yes, and in Ephesus 475, it was an Oriental Orthodox synod. They said that they actually, and the emperor at the time was tolerant, I guess is the word for Oriental Orthodoxy at the time. So the council decided that, you know what, Constantinople shouldn't be a patriarchate anyway. Let's put it back under Ephesus. So it's really in one of the canons.
Don't you think that, isn't it Heraclea, right? Weren't they originally under them? So then they get screwed out of it if it goes under Ephesus. That's not fair to them.
You're right. And then my other question for you, Craig, was, and I think this is the biggest issue for the people who matter, was Saint Severus in 518, was he deposed canonically or not? So the deposition of Saint Severus was because he wouldn't sign the libellus. So the emperor exiled. He was actually looking to arrest him. So Saint Severus ran away to the desert in Egypt. Now, in the diptychs, even in the Eastern Orthodox diptychs of 512 to 518, we agree Severus of Antioch is the Patriarch of Antioch. He's on the list for both of us. Now, the difference is we go to 538. In 518, the Eastern Orthodox have Paul the Jew, who was, even according to Chalcedonian canon law, his ordination was not canonical in terms of the way it's supposed to happen. The details slip my mind now. I just know because I've read that. So this goes. The reason I'm bringing this up and I'm asking you about it is because you talked about Saint Jacob Bardaeus. So it's all connected. If Saint Severus was the rightful patriarch in Antioch, because at the time there was only one. This was before the dual lines. So if he was, then that means the synod in communion with that patriarch is the rightful synod. If he was rightly deposed, not by an ecumenical council or anything, just because of the libellus, then okay, so it doesn't matter. Everything after that doesn't matter. Jacob Bardaeus, all of that is invalid. Who cares? But if he wasn't, so then Jacob Bardaeus is, and those people, the bishops that were with him, are Saint Severus' synod, the synod that's in communion with that patriarch. I think that the Eastern Orthodox should think about it, address the question, and not just that, but also if his deposition is valid, is it because of Rome? Again, back to that theme of where Rome is dictating the right side or not?
Now, I don't know the details there, so I'll try to offer some intelligent comments and one inference. It sounds like from what you're drawing was there was some sort of synod, there was some sort of papal legate or some sort of letter from Rome that would have affirmed what this synod had, and Severus did not appear, and he would have been, by the rules of that synod, canonically deposed. If that were the case, I would affirm it, because again, it would have had. I'm sorry, there was no synod. Was this simply a decree from Justin?
Yeah, the synod, the foreign hormistus went out to all the bishops to sign. Whoever signed keeps his seat. Whoever doesn't sign can't keep his seat. It was simple.
And so you're saying there wasn't a formal deposition to begin with? They just
there was no ecclesiastic that deposed themselves.
Okay, then I can't comment more on that, but this is what I could comment on. Severus is interesting because he was like, I don't know, it's kind of anachronistic, but permit me to say the term, he was a Roman patriot. Even though he was on the wrong side of the emperor, he was not against the emperor. He worked with the Roman emperor quite closely. He, for that reason, did not allow for parallel bishoprics to be set up when he was alive. He even, I think, with trepidation, really didn't even do the same across in Persian borders. So I think some of that occurred, but I don't think he was involved with that. So he's an interesting character. He was also very much a convinced ideologue, a man of his ideals, because he went to Constantinople. He was there for a period of time, and he just wouldn't compromise. However, the Oriental Orthodox succession doesn't derive from him. It derives from, like we talked about, Jacob Bardaeus. And for then all of those ordinations to be valid, it requires, I don't want to use the word legend with a derogatory tone, but in the life from John of Tella, who was ordained by Jacob Bardaeus, he doesn't actually say that the bishop, the exiled bishop of Alexandria, the Oriental Orthodox one, he doesn't actually say he's the one who ordained Jacob. So really, it's a mystery how he was ordained. There's this kind of backstory that was through Theodora and this exiled bishop of Alexandria, but we actually don't have any real evidence of that. We do know that, because we have set quite a few letters, that he worked quite closely with that bishop of Alexandria. But we don't have evidence that he was ordained by him. So most historians think it's highly probable he was. We don't have any real evidence that he wasn't. But I would say that's why the validity of Severus would have been kind of irrelevant, only because of his deposition, not because really all of the succession doesn't come from him. It comes from Jacob Bardaeus. So the whole question would hinge upon whether his ordinations are valid. And I'd say, without being overly legalistic, I think we would agree, just like it was clearly not friendly that Justinian's policy was to wait till the Oriental Orthodox bishops died, and he replaced them with company men, with Chalcedonians, and they were unopposed until really Jacob Bardaeus entered the scene and started ordaining people like crazy. So was Jacob Bardaeus setting up second chairs, as they say, second altars, adding second bishoprics? By all means. Would I even affirm, like, well, that's kind of just desserts, like a punishment from God for the fact that Justinian was playing politics, and the Roman world accepted the Christian church being pretty much minimized under a state apparatus? I'd say yes. I think all these things are absolutely punishment from God for our sinfulness. But I do think it's pretty clear that Jacob Bardaeus set up a parallel church, which would be by definition schismatic.
So here's why I'm telling you Severus, because the rightful patriarch, like whoever it is, the bishops in communion with him become the right bishops. It can't be the bishops that aren't in communion with him. So if Severus, who died in 538, was the rightful patriarch until 538, it means all the bishops that were in communion with him were the rightful synod that can then make another patriarch and can then ordain other bishops. So therefore, that is the continuation of the Church of Antioch.
So perhaps with an Antioch-centric view or the Severian-centric view of the universe, but how about all the other bishops, which Jacob Bardaeus ordained bishops then invaded their territories? All those other bishops are recognized by the rest of the world other than Severus, who was dead. No,
that's not what I mean. So what I mean is this. By the time St. Severus died, so maybe 2 years before that, Alexandria was Miaphysite. It's never not been. The Pope of Alexandria you're referring to, who went to Constantinople with Theodora, he wasn't there on exile. He was just there visiting. He was. There
was a Chalcedonian bishop in Alexandria at that time.
It might have just started the Chalcedonian line, but before that, it was very hard for a Chalcedonian to step foot in Alexandria. Regardless, Severus and Anthimus, as you know, Anthimus was in communion with Severus, and he was in communion with Alexandria too. So Constantinople was even Miaphysite. Severus, he ordained John of Tella, by the way. He ordained Jacob of Seruge. And he didn't ordain Philoxenos, but Philoxenos was in communion with Severus. And Jacob Bardaeus and Theodore were in the party. And even if the Pope of Alexandria, I think it was Theodosius, even if he ordains the Bishop of Edessa, who is Jacob Bardaeus, and John of Tella, and John of Ephesus, and others, it's not just.
I'll just interrupt. I got the wrong John, by the way. I'm talking about a different John. I think a John of Antioch, because obviously John Tella was dead. He couldn't write Jacob Bardaeus' life. So my apologies.
John of Ephesus wrote Jacob Bardaeus' life, I think. So in all of these cases, it's not like Jacob Bardaeus was on some crusade to let's just make a bunch of rebel churches. No, Jacob Bardaeus viewed himself, and he wasn't alone in this. He viewed himself as he is part of that continuation of those bishops that are in communion with the right see of Antioch. So, and it wasn't just him. So then, it's not a Severian view only. Again, there's 20 million Copts. There's maybe 200,000 Eastern Orthodox Alexandrians. So Egypt was always, imagine when there was no persecution. If there's persecution and it's 20 million versus 200,000, what if there wasn't? It would be maybe 100%. Maybe there wouldn't be any Muslims. Who knows? But what I'm saying is, if you are the one true church, and there is an emperor who is in cahoots with a rivaling faction, heretics, whatever, and he is killing all of your people, and there's just a few bishops left, and one bishop kind of has a bigger name because of the stuff he's doing. It doesn't mean that it becomes illegitimate. It just means all of your people are dying. You said Justinian was waiting for them to die. He wasn't. I'm a fan of Justinian, but there were persecutions. There were real persecutions. Like, they were actually killing non-Chalcedonians a lot. There's a story of they held a Syriac Orthodox monk down and forced him to take the Chalcedonian communion, and he spit it out. And because he spit it out, they burned him. So there's a lot of these examples. But the reason why I think
to answer your, being that you pose this as a question, I think we're getting a little off the beaten path. And then I'll give you the last word. I'll just say this: I don't accept the premise of your question, because Severus was dead for 4, 5, 6 years before Jacob Bardaeus was ordained. At least what we believe, because the chronology is not super good, but still, he was dead. By then, there was another bishop of Antioch. There was another bishop in Alexandria. You could look up the successions, and the violence was both ways. And the violence was clearly initiated actually by the Copts. and by the Miaphysites. Now, that does not mean how Justinian responded was anything but humane. But the violence started 100 years before, and it actually started way before then. I mean, it started pretty much even in the days of Cyril Alexandria, his uncle. This was an ongoing problem in Egypt, and I think nationalist aspirations just grew worse and worse and worse. I know Cal, one of our contributors here, really disagrees with me on that, but that's not my reading of the history. So the violence goes both ways. I don't think we could say, they were the schismatics, they followed a policy of violence, because really that violence was initiated by again, the partisans in Egypt. That's why it elicited the response from the Roman Empire. But I'll give you the last word.
So I just want to say about Severus and the Synod. If you have a rivaling Chalcedonian patriarch, not since Severus died, since 518. So there is already now a separate synod and a separate line while Severus is alive. So that for 20 years. So that means it's already then questionable that whoever that is deciding, making the decisions for the other party, that's already questionable automatically. That's why I'm saying, if his deposition is wrong, if it was invalid. If it's invalid, then the bishops in communion with Severus, those are the only bishops who are in the church. Even and then this is assuming, we're not talking about Christology. We're just talking about canon law of whether he was deposed validly or not. So then, in that case, the bishops don't only include the Synod of Antioch for St. Severus, but also the Synod of Alexandria and all the synods who are in communion with the right patriarchs. That's how you see who the church is. So then, if the Pope of Alexandria is the one who ordained a bishop in another jurisdiction, which he's done multiple times in history before, he's done it in Constantinople and Antioch, and Rome has done it. Everybody's done it for each other, back and forth. So if that's the case, it's not a problem. Even if Saint Jacob was ordained bishop after Severus died, it wasn't 6 years. I think it might have been a little bit less. I think it doesn't mean that it was invalid because he was. It just it doesn't imply anything, because all it implies is the Church of.
But you would need that connection, right? You would need that succession between both and a communion between both for there to be one single strand, one valid line.
You're saying Severus needs to ordain him? It can't be another patriarch that ordains him?
If Severus is dead, his whole line, there's no ordained bishops. Doesn't mean there's not a lot of well-meaning lay people that have their convictions that he represented. But I think, like I said, I apologize. I really should have. I said I'd give you the last word, so I'll just.
No, it's okay. I just wanted to. You're clarifying something. I'm just saying, it's not. So there were bishops. It's not like there were no more Syriac Orthodox bishops at all. Zero. There were bishops. It's not just. It wasn't just Jacob was the only bishop there. 6 years later, there were other bishops. The point, though, is, after Severus died, it didn't mean all the other Syriac Orthodox. He was the last Syriac Orthodox bishop, was Saint Severus, until 4 years later. Then some more. The Alexandria ordained some more of them. No, there were others. I think it's an oversimplification. I don't think that the continuation needs to be from a specific patriarch to the person. Another example of this: Serapion of Antioch in the 2nd century. He had to get his ordination from Rome. He went to Rome to get the ordination and came back to Antioch because, for some reason, I don't know, probably persecution, he wasn't able to get it from Antioch. And we see it from the teaching of Edde and from a lot of other texts we have regarding this subject. So it's
yeah. On that note, because to be honest with you, I would be pretty much on your side. It seems kind of incredible because our historians would say, nope, all the bishops are gone. That was it. And Jacob Bardaeus rose it from the ashes like a phoenix. But my question would be is, right, didn't he get ordained because there was some like Arab vassal king, right? Like they're kind of connected to Rome, but they were their own state. So like these vassals. Yeah. And they sent to get a bishop of theirs. If they were able to get a bishop closer, why would they send to Constantinople to get that bishop? So that it at least lends credibility to that very hard to believe notion that there were no more of these Miaphysite bishops yet left. But it's, again, to put on my Orthodox hat, not my historian hat, that would seem to be at least indicative of maybe there really were no bishops left. And Jacob Bardaeus and this guy exiled in Constantinople really were the last ones.
Well, there was Theodore also. He was there. Regarding those Arabs, this is off point. I just want to say, so in Middle Eastern tradition, we have a good, we're pretty good at like keeping genealogies and lineage and stuff. This is just for fun, I'm telling you. My dad's side, we trace back to them, to those, the vassal state. Yeah. But anyway, so, and the funny thing is his whole tribe is Eastern Orthodox. They're not even Oriental now. But that's a good point, I think. Why would they need Theodora to do that for them if there were bishops closer? The thing is this: they weren't, when they were asking for it, they weren't asking from Arabia or from actually Jordan. They actually, the king, Al-Harith, he went to Constantinople, visiting for diplomatic reasons, you know, strategy and all that against the Persians and the Nestorian Arabs on that side. So he was talking to Theodora and he asked to take a bishop with him back, not for a bishop to be removed from a diocese from a closer area, but since I'm already going on my way, send a bishop with me to go. So they sent actually two bishops. There was Jacob and Theodore. Theodore was supposed to be for the Arabs. Jacob had to eventually run away because of the persecution, so he ran to them also.
If y'all are ready, I have a couple chat questions, if it's okay for me to present those.
Sure.
So one of them, I misplaced it, but I pretty much recall it was a person, I want to say by the name of N. Mar, and they ask about catechetical information from the Oriental Orthodox perspective. Are there any good catechetical books that introduce the Oriental Orthodox faith?
Yes, there are. Robert Murray, if you guys have heard of him, he's a Catholic priest. He passed away recently, a couple of years ago. He actually converted J.R.R. Tolkien to Catholicism. He has a book called Symbols on Church and Kingdom regarding the Syriac tradition. It's very good. Also, Sebastian Brock, Luminous Eye. Those are probably the best. There's Syriac Fathers on Prayer, but that's a good one. But yeah, for the most part, it's those two. Those two are big ones. Also, the Pauline Allen book for Severus. There is Preaching Christology in the Roman Near East. That's about Jacob of Serugis Christology, who's actually also a saint in the Roman Catholic Church. I think that's very interesting. And Philoxenos of Mabug, The Practical Christology. These books, they help to see the historical context of that time and the Christology being taught. But for the question you asked, Michael, is those main two, Robert Murray and Sebastian Brock, Luminous Eye and Symbols.
This one is from Elijah. He says, or asks, how accurate was the Chalcedonian council in digging up dirt on Dioscorus? Was it polemical or was it accurate?
I think this goes back to what Craig was saying earlier, how the councils are good at strong arming. And here's the thing with Dioscorus and Chalcedon. Chalcedon did not depose him for heresy. We need to always remember that. The Eastern Orthodox especially, please. he wasn't. And actually, he wasn't even accused of heresy for a long time after. No one thought of him as a heretic for a long time. I think the first time anyone mentions Dioscoros as a heretic was in the Libellus of Pope Hormisdas, in the formula, and only because of something about communion, and not even like regarding being in communion with someone, or I don't even know if he explicitly says his Christology was heretical. And then you don't see it in Constantinople 553 at all. The first time you see a Chalcedonian council saying Dioscoros was a heretic was 680, Constantinople 3. So imagine that's, I'm not a mathematician, that's 230 years later. 230 years later, they're saying he was a heretic. So even then, like Craig said, he was deposed for not coming for the thrice summons, not for heresy.
I do want to add a comment on that real quick. I mean, I actually think there is some reason to believe that they consider him a heretic in Chalcedon, though I would affirm that they didn't explicitly call him as such, but it's because when they made the debate over the definition, there's some detail on this because the Bishop of Constantinople was kind of taken aback that they had this agreement that they had this definition. It used of two natures, you know, and from two natures instead of two natures. And they got that language from Flavian, so they thought there's no issue because Flavian was already being venerated. And they said, well, no, if Dioscorus used it, it can't be right. So that to me does imply that there is doctrinal ground for them disagreeing with his Christology, though again that would only be implied, obviously, because it's that's the only thing I could come up with. But it is suggestive that they were not approving his Christology, that they would not accept the definition because it used his language, even though it was also language of Flavian.
So, are you familiar with Sebastian Brock? Right?
Vaguely. I mean, I read something from him 3 a.m. in the morning.
So
otherwise, I have no previous info on it.
I would say the foremost scholar, Syriac tradition scholar. So it translates things from those times into English and whatnot. So he translated the conversations, he calls them the conversations, between the Syriac Orthodox and the Chalcedonians in the 530s, leading up to the Synod of 536 in Constantinople, where Pope Agapitus presides in that council, and he deposes Anthimus, and he condemns Severus for Nestorianism and Monophysitism, both of them. Now, in that, leading up to the conversations, though, Justinian was sponsoring this dialogue between both sides, and the Chalcedonian side admitted in the council, in the conversations, that Dioscoros was Orthodox in those conversations. Then, Justinian intentionally allowed for Anthimus to become Patriarch of Constantinople in order for reconciliation to happen, not knowing Pope Agapitus was in the neighborhood. So then when he's there, and obviously Rome presides over the council, who else would? And Pope Agapitus is like, I'm not cool with this, and Anthimus is deposed. But look into those conversations. I can send them to you. I have them. It's very interesting to see that the Chalcedonians, even in that time, did not believe Dioscoros was a formal heretic. Go ahead.
And just so viewers that may not be aware, Subdeacon Daniel regularly sends me everything he was talking about tonight has been sent to me in articles, so it's not like he's been pulling. I've lost internet connection here, so I'll just repeat my point because it looked like we lost our connection, and it was, the Subdeacon Daniel has been sending me these articles and stuff on my Facebook messengers. And again, it looks like we're losing connection. So I don't know how much of that everyone heard. So I won't repeat myself a third time unless you want me to.
Try summons. Try summons.
Let me go to the next question here. What do you think of Coptic Catholicism and prospects for reunion with the Catholic Church? Is it more likely that will happen more than reunion with Chalcedonian Orthodox?
Okay, so again, asking people who matter these questions. The answer I got was the Catholics are ready. And the issue with the Catholics is that they want the Pope to be the patriarch above the patriarchs and not one of the patriarchs. And this is where the conversation is at. They say we want to talk about more stuff. We want to talk about other dogmas, but they won't. They're like, yeah, whatever, just believe whatever you want. But this is where we're at. Like the Catholics are focused, and those want to actually talk about other things, saying like regarding, let's say, or whatever, But this is where the dialogue with the Catholics is. Whereas with the Eastern Orthodox, like I mentioned earlier, it's at the lines of patriarchy.
Trying to find some additional questions here. It's kind of hard to. I guess this is a question. Jonathan saying it's a question. It looks like it's in the form of a statement. If the will is a property of nature and Christ has two wills, then Christ has two natures as well. The two natural wills of Christ subsist after the hypostatic union, therefore, so do the two natures. It's not a question, but maybe if you could comment on whether you agree with that or not.
So if we're saying natures, if we're saying by natures, we're talking about ousia, sure. If we're saying that he is two beings, then no. If we're saying he is two hypostases in the Trinity, then no. He's one. So when he says, when we're talking about, so St. Severus gives an example of walking on the water. He says, in walking, I actually want to read the quote, if you guys don't mind, real quick. Is that okay? So I don't want to mess it up.
How long do we have dead air? Can we make another comment? I'm gonna try to make my comment again. So just so guys know, if you didn't hear me say it 3 times, it's that Subdeacon Dan, he sends me all the stuff he's talking about tonight. He sends me in articles and stuff in Facebook Messenger. So it wasn't like he was trying to like blindside me or something like that. He's an open book, and I'm sure if you reach out to him too about any of these questions, he would also be more than happy to share with you all the same information.
Thank you, Craig. I appreciate that. Thank you. So this is the quote from St. Severus. He says, "How will anyone divide walking on the water? To run upon the sea is foreign to the human nature, but it is not proper to the divine nature to use bodily feet. Therefore, that action is of the incarnate Word, to whom belongs at the same time divine character and human, indivisibly." So in the sense of wills and the properties and operation, all of that, there's no division. So the one who walked on the water, God doesn't have feet, and humans can't walk on water. So it's the one incarnate will, one incarnate word, and this word has one will of two wills, like we said. In Arabic and other Semitic languages, it's more. So, and I think in Eastern Orthodoxy, you have this. You have this typology, liturgically speaking. We say we can't put the coal. We can't put the coal in the censer if it's not lit in our rules in the church. If we're putting a coal in the censer for the incense, we can't put it in if it's not lit, because there was never a moment where Jesus was not God. So in Mary's womb, as soon as there was a fetus, an embryo, whatever, he's God. God is there. There was never a moment where he wasn't God. Okay, so before a union, there is a coal and there's fire. in Arabic, the word for coal actually changes once the coal is lit, and other Semitic languages. It's no longer called a coal. There's another word for it. It's specifically a lit coal. Just like in Isaiah, how the angel takes the coal from the altar and gives it and puts it on Isaiah's lips. The word here is not just a coal. It's a lit coal. So this is how we think of the union between the divinity and the humanity in Christ. It's inseparable. It's one. And no mixing, like Craig said. They stay distinct. They stay distinct without mixing. But Daniel and Craig and Michael are not the ones who then decide where the line is drawn between where it's distinct and where it's not. That's a mystery. That's the mystery of the incarnation. He knows that. So it's the one incarnate word.
I think Emil Surik asked a good question, which is, yes, but how did the God-man die on the cross? So to follow up on your point there about the walking on water, it would appear that we'd have to differentiate between the natures in order to explain how he died in his human nature, but obviously in his divine nature, he can't die.
Right. The God is impassible, but he took on passibility in order for him to die, right? So the person is still God, but he took on a body in order to die for us. He can't die in his own nature, so he has to take on the human nature so that
he can't die in his divine nature, obviously, because of impassibility. But he could will to die in his human nature. And so the human could be dead for 3 days, and the divine nature is obviously not. Divine nature is
the Trinity didn't become two in 3 days; it stayed Trinity. So, but at the same time, the divinity never left his body in the womb, and never left his sorry, I mix languages. The spirit. Now he never left his human spirit at any moment.
Well, you mean his soul, I assume?
Yeah, his soul.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Well,
doesn't
very
he
well
put the Father?
Yeah, we would normally say that.
Commend my spirit.
The soul, the spirit, the body. There was never a moment where the divinity left any of his humanity.
Yeah.
In any way.
Right. Yeah. So the divinity never left his human body or human soul.
Or human spirit, all of it. He didn't leave.
Yeah. Well, so you would distinguish between spirit, body, and soul, absolutely distinct. There's a tripartite aspect to man instead of a bipartite.
Right.
That'd be an interesting conversation. I'd like to talk more about that, but we'll have to go ahead and wrap it up. We're at an hour 45. So I appreciate you so much for coming on. Craig, thank you for joining us. But again, thank you so much, Subdeacon. Always an honor to have you. I'd love to have you on again.
Thank you. I appreciate being here. Thanks again, guys.
Okay. Well, both of y'all take care. Everyone, thank you for watching. Please share this information on your social media. Also hit the like button and the subscribe button here on YouTube. And, of course, hit the bell for notifications so that you can know whenever we're going live. And, of course, we also have the reasonandtheology.com website where you can visit and find more information. You can also support what we're doing. And also the Facebook page and Twitter page. So there's all that. So, of course, take a look at our Reason and Theology pages there as well. Again, thank you all for watching. Until next time, God bless you all.